I'm Dr. Sara Patterson, and you're listening to Gospel Tangents.
It's the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to have Dr. Sara Patterson on the show. She's the author of a new book on the September 6th and a struggle for the soul of Mormonism. So it'd be a great book to put under the tree for your Mormon history lovers. And we're going to talk first about how she got involved with this, and it involves Dr. Michael Quinn. And so the question that we'd like to ask is his story tragic or triumph? So we'll let Dr. Patterson answer that question. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to have an amazing, at least new to me, historian. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are and where you teach?
Sure. I'm Sara Patterson, and I teach at Hanover College in southern Indiana.
Southern Indiana. So are you a Hoosier?
I guess so.
Well, one of the things I always like to do is I like to get people's backgrounds. Where did you get your bachelor's and master's and PhD and all that stuff?
I received my undergraduate degree from Denison University in Ohio, and then I went to Claremont Graduate School for my doctorate.
Oh, was that with Patrick Mason?
I was there before Patrick Mason.
Oh, so Dr. Bushman.
No, I studied with Ann Taves, and then on my dissertation committee, Jan Ships was a member.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
I just thought it was Bushman and then Patrick Mason. I didn't know Ann Taves was in there.
I was there when they were fundraising for that chair. So
okay.
Yeah,
was Ann before Richard Bushman then?
I want to say she overlapped with him 1 year, and then she went to UC Santa Barbara.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. Yeah. Wow. So you're an old timer then in Mormon studies, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Except for now, is it, did you major in Mormon studies or was it just religious studies, or tell us more about your
my degree's in history,
okay.
But I specialized in religious history in the United States. And so Mormonism has always been an interest of mine.
Okay. So, because you're not Mormon.
I'm not.
And so how did you get interested in Mormon studies?
It was just through the study of religion in the United States and in reading about the early church. I was just kind of captivated by the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
I talked to Christina Rossetti. Do you know Christina?
Yeah.
She said that kind of like Parley P. Pratt, she opened up Rough Stone Rolling and she read it all night. Did you have any experiences like that?
I don't think I would characterize it that way, but that's great. It was more of a slow growing interest in me. Yeah.
Okay. So has that just like, did you, when you were 6 years old, you probably didn't say, I'm going to grow up as a religious studies scholar.
I did not.
How did that development happen?
In college, I took a required religion class, and it just opened my eyes. I've always been interested, I think, in why people do and act the ways that they do. And so the religion class just helped me see religion as a motivator for people, and I was just hooked at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you have any other interests besides Mormonism?
Yeah, I'm interested more broadly in gender and sexuality in religion, and then also in material culture and sacred spaces.
Okay.
And so one of my first major projects was about a piece of outsider art in Southern California. And I did a project, it's out in the middle of the desert, and so I interviewed people who were coming to visit that space called Salvation Mountain, and I was just interested in how the artist and the people who visited created sacred space together.
Okay. Well, very good. And so then you got your first job in Indiana, and that's why you're there now, is that right?
Yeah, it was my first tenure track job.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's why I'm there now.
All right. Well, it's interesting. So you've written a new book. Why don't you go ahead and show everybody the book and
Sure.
Tell us how you got involved in this book.
Am I holding it up correctly?
You're doing a very good job.
Okay. Tell you how I got involved.
So for those who aren't watching, what's it
Yes.
called?
The September 6th and the Struggle for the Soul of Mormonism.
Okay.
I would say a couple of things. Perhaps most recently, I was asked to be part of a conference maybe 2 years ago now that Ben Park helped put together that was honoring the life and contributions of Mike Quinn.
Oh, that was here at University of Utah, right?
Yes, it was.
I was at that conference.
Okay. Well, I gave a paper there. And studying more about Quinn, who is somebody that I met in graduate school because he was a friend of one of my professors, just really drew me into this time period in new ways. And so when Barbara Jones-Brown at Signature talked to me about doing a book more broadly about the September 6th, I was really excited for that opportunity.
Okay. So Michael Quinn kind of drew you in, and then you've expanded it to the others.
That's right. That's right. I'd known about the September 6th for a long time, but yeah, reading more about Quinn's life just really drew me in.
Well, it must be interesting. Mormons were often very insular, and so when you first heard about the September 6th, I don't know if you have a religious background, like if you're Orthodox, whatever, Baptist or whatever. Does it look really strange that this church out here in Utah is excommunicating a bunch of intellectuals? How did you come across that story, and what were your reactions?
I think that I had been studying the history of Christianity for long enough that it wasn't shocking to me that a church would do that. I mean, I think that religious institutions, that's one of the ways that they can manage the boundaries in their communities. And so I think it was intriguing to me that it's something that was happening so recently, because you tend to think of excommunications as a method of the past, though they certainly...
Galileo.
Yeah, right. I wasn't even thinking that far back. But yeah, so I think that excommunications, that story kind of draws people in, I think, because it's such a severe measure.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I have a friend, a Jewish friend, and he told me you cannot be excommunicated from Judaism, even for murder, because under their rule or logic, I guess, God is to be your judge. Mm-hmm. And so Christianity hasn't followed that same tact. The Catholic Church. But are you familiar with other churches that excommunicate people for not following the pure doctrine or whatever?
I think most of the examples I know of are within Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, the Catholic Church, I guess, is big, and I guess they got the Salem witch trials, maybe.
Yeah.
Are there other examples besides those, even more recent?
Oh, sure. There's a Catholic theologian whose name I will probably butcher because I've only ever read it. I haven't heard it. But it's... his last name is Balasaraya, and he wrote a book about Mary that's really fascinating and was disciplined and I think excommunicated for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that was another Catholic example, right?
Yeah, relatively recently, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I just... I wish excommunication would go away, personally. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't seem like it has, at least in the LDS Church. Can you talk a little bit more about how Michael Quinn kind of drew you in, and then how it expanded into the September 6th?
Sure. I was able to read portions of his journal and memoir when I was working on my presentation for the Quinn Conference. And that ultimately wasn't what I focused on in my presentation. What I focused on was how we today narrate Quinn's life, and what I think is kind of a problematic way of telling his life story that talks about him as a rising star, and then after his excommunication frames his life as a series of losses. And I was pushing it back against that narrative because I think it uses the church's lens to read his life story.
Okay.
And so part of what I was looking at was how Quinn reconstructed his family and restructured his family, how he created community in places like affirmation, and how, while we may think that his life didn't live up to understandings of family that might be ideal, and he didn't ever find a long-term partner, that his life wasn't a series of losses. I was saying that we don't need to read him as a tragic figure, that we can certainly see that there were hardships and tragedies in his life, but also acknowledge that he continued to live a rich life after his excommunication.
And I'm glad you went there, because that's something that I think those of us who are still in the LDS Church look at. Here he is. He's one of the most popular teachers at BYU. Everything's going really well. He's had some experiences with President Kimball, and then he gets excommunicated, and then he loses his job at BYU. Mm-hmm. He's never able to get another tenure track position anywhere. It seems like he's kind of forced out of some positions. I know I think he taught at Yale for a year or two, and I think Arizona State maybe as well. But it does look, from an inside perspective, that he has had a series of losses, and that this, it was pretty devastating to him. And so it's interesting to hear from you to say, we need to look at this in another way. Mm-hmm. I know that in some respects, among the more critical crowd, he's kind of seen as a hero, and a lot of his writings have kind of triumphed in a way. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of I hate to use the word ex-Mormon hero in a way, but he's still a believer up through his death, a very, very strong believer. So tell us more about why you're pushing back against that narrative that I just gave.
Well, I think, as I said briefly, that it uses the church's measuring stick of what a life is supposed to be. And so I think that we need to kind of expand our understanding of what a rich life can be beyond that set of expectations, because he continued to have faith. And he talked about having a fulfilling life. He talked about himself as a mystic, and as a member of a church of one. But he talked about how he continued to have a very close relationship with God and continued to feel connected to the Spirit. And I think that we have to include that in the story, even when his relationship with the institution was so painful, because it's a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
And I think too often, sometimes to try to get him into the category of martyr,
right?
The last
he does
part
seem
of
like
his
a martyr.
life, yeah. No, I think a lot of people do see him as a martyr, but I think too often to kind of get him into that narrative, people talk about his life as a series of losses and things that he lost because he was willing to stand up and speak the truth. But one of the things I talked about was, once he left the church, he was able to ask research questions that he wanted to ask, right? And there's a kind of freedom that he had in his intellectual life that opened up. And so I just think that there's complexity that gets lost sometime in forcing him into that martyr story.
Okay. Can we look at, could we call his life a life of abundance? And if so, what would be some of those abundant things? I mean, you did mention he could study more freely. Are there other things besides that?
Well, I think his spiritual life. I think people tend to focus on the disintegration of his family when years after he came out to his wife. And and don't talk about the fact that they restructured their family. And so he spent his holidays with his ex-wife and his children. So I think a broader understanding of family is necessary for thinking about his relationships.
So even though his marriage went away, he was still able to embrace his ex-wife and family and have a good life with them.
Yeah. And
which is pretty unusual.
Yeah, she wanted him to be part of his children's lives, and he was. So, yeah.
Well, very good. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Sara Patterson. She's the author of The September 6th and the Struggle for the Soul of Mormonism. So make sure you get this book and put it under your tree for your Mormon history lovers. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about BYU professors who were denied tenure.
David Knowlton was a professor at BYU, along with Cecilia Concher-Farr and Gail Houston. And all three of them in 1992 were up for review and for their teaching positions. And the question was whether they would have continuing status. And which
is like tenure in a way?
The closest to tenure that you can get at BYU.
Right.
Yeah. And all three of them were denied continuing status and so had one more year in their positions and then asked to leave.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.